When we're in an IPv4 network, we're going to rely on a protocol known as ARP, Address Resolution Protocol, ARP. What is the purpose of ARP? It is to identify the MAC address of an IPv4 address we know about. So if I know about the IPv4 address of 192.168.2.4, and I need to send that specific device a frame inside of my local area network, then I'm going to ARP out on the local area network and say, hey, if you own 192.168.2.4, give me your MAC address. Or if this is my default gateway, then I'm going to say, hey, if you're 192.168.2.4, give me your MAC address. So that's what ARP is all about. It's all about figuring out the MAC address of an IP address you want to communicate with. So on your local area network, you're going to get the MAC address of the specific IP address. If you need to communicate with a device outside of your local area network, then you need the MAC address of your default gateway. And ARP's going to accomplish that for you. Well, ARP does not exist at all for IPv6. No. But does Ethernet? Well, of course, because Ethernet's layer 2, IPv6 is layer 3. So how do we figure out MAC addresses in relation to IPv6 addresses if there's no ARP? We have a neighbor discovery process now. So instead of ARP, we're going to be working with neighbor discovery. So we refer to that as ND for short, neighbor discovery. In the neighbor discovery process, we have neighbor advertisements and neighbor solicitation messages. And through these different types of messages, we have the ability to identify the MAC addresses for known IPv6 addresses. So here at the top, we are looking at an example of a PC, a Windows PC. And it's not as easy as typing in ARP-A. Look at what we had to type here. NetSH interface IPv6 show neighbor. And then we'll see here that all of the different addresses here that we know about in our table, and these are the respective MAC addresses that go along with them. So the big one here that I'm really going to focus on is this entry right here, the one that's highlighted for us. So this is a link local address, and this link local address belongs to our router's interface that is connected to the same local area network that we are connected to, the PC. So at some point in time, I had to send out a neighbor solicitation message. And that neighbor solicitation message was asking for the MAC address of this particular device. So I received back as a response this MAC address right here. So now when I want to talk to my default gateway at this particular link local address, I have the MAC address to put in the layer 2 Ethernet frame. So this is the address that goes in the destination IP field or the destination IPv6 field of the packet. And there's the MAC address that goes in the layer 2 frame. So likewise, if we look at our router here, show IPv6 neighbors is the command on our router. Notice the IPv6 addresses we have listed there. We have some global addresses. We have some link local addresses. And then the link layer address is the MAC address. So if we want to talk to 2001 DB8 101 1A08, I'm not going to read the rest of that address. It's way too long. But you'll see that we go to 000C2936FDF7. So here is the IPv6 address. If I want to talk to that device, that is the IPv6 address in the packet as an example, and that is the MAC address that goes in the frame. Now, when it comes to forwarding, though, let's always remember that if I receive a packet that's going to some place out on the internet, and I'm a router inside somebody's network, if I'm trying to reach or send this packet to wherever out on the internet, I do my routing table lookup, and the routing table says use this next top IP address. So let's say the next top IP address in this particular case is this FE80 address listed here. So that's the next top IP address. And we're going to use gigabit 0/1 to get there. So what is the particular link local address? So we're going to do neighbor table lookup, it's called, not an ARP lookup or an ARP cache lookup. We're going to look at our neighbor table and see if we have an entry in there. And in this case, we do have an entry. So if we didn't have an entry, though, we'd have to send out our neighbor solicitation message in order to figure out who owns the MAC address of FE8021E, et cetera, et cetera. So the process is very similar to ARP. So with ARP, we have our ARP requests and our ARP replies. So we have broadcast requests and unicast replies. But now when it comes to neighbor discovery process, we have neighbor solicitation messages and neighbor advertisement messages. And based on these messages, we're dealing with multicast messages instead. So multicast messages to find out who owns that particular MAC address based on the IP address, and then a unicast reply coming back. So broadcast and unicast for IPv4, multicast and unicast for IPv6.